oh no, there's a red tally light.
All right, if you would, sir, give me a clap by your chin. You're good at that. Well, David, thank you so much for being here. This means a lot to me. You know, in this time of coronavirus, a lot of us aren't doing what we love, which is making movies. For me, it's primarily audio, documentary film. And so first, tell us your name and your primary and secondary roles in the film industry.
Sure. I'm Dave Patterson, and I would say my primary roles are camera work, video production, and editing, post-production.
Why did you get into the film industry?
Well, prior to working in film, I was doing mostly print media production. I did primarily Photoshop color correction, retouching, compositing, a little bit of illustration, a lot of map making. And I was teaching at School of Visual Concepts in Seattle. And one day I was lamenting to the director that as more and more companies were going to web-based marketing, that print media was sort of taking a back seat. It was just a paradigm shift. And he said, Dave, you should get involved with After Effects. You're a wizard with Photoshop. And I go, wow, that sounds great, Larry. What the hell is After Effects? And he said, this is basically Photoshop with a timeline. Cool. What's a timeline? I mean, I really didn't know. I mean, I kind of knew, but I didn't really know. So anyhow, so I started looking into it, and I thought, yeah, Photoshop, that's fun, but I had been doing it for like over, 10 years. I was a beta tester of 2.0 Photoshop before we'd even had layers, so old school. So I got into After Effects, started watching tutorials, and the first thing I needed, I was thinking initially of getting involved with, I liked CGI, computer effects, compositing. I thought that was fascinating. And I needed footage to work on. And coincidentally, at the same time that I got into playing around with After Effects, I had done some guitar tutorials for a friend of mine, and he shot video of me doing the guitar tutorials so that he would have a way to document them and play them back and whatever. And he had this little Panasonic GH1 camera, and I was fascinated at the video quality. So I thought like, oh gosh, I should buy one of these cameras and I could just shoot footage that I could use in After Effects for tutorials and for compositing. I didn't really think I was going to get into doing filmmaking. I just wanted a way to capture video footage because buying stock footage was expensive and the available free footage was limited. So long story short, I bought a camera. And then it was like almost immediately it occurred to me that like, wow, I've been watching movies all my life and television, and I think everybody's wired for stories. So when I all of a sudden had this tool in my hands where I could shoot film or video, the storytelling bug kind of kicked in, and I quickly realized that like this was a more interesting medium than still photos. I mean, yeah, a picture tells is worth 1,000 words. But it's still a static image, and I was always like at the end of somebody else's post-production work in most cases, doing color correction or retouching and compositing. Whereas with video, aka filmmaking, I was kind of at the other end, the beginning end, the more creative end. That combined with this shift of having to think linearly, it just kind of sparked a whole bunch of new brain cells that had never been activated before. So that was the essential introduction to the interest. And then from there, I just started watching tutorials and started playing around and doing a variety of different things. And it just kind of led to where I am now.
I know you're a talented musician and have been doing that lifelong. How do you think music relates to your drive to be a filmmaker?
They're very similar, very similar. On a couple levels. One, when I was a kid, I was into making models. And I think the attraction was basically putting bits of pieces of things together and seeing something come out of it. And with Photoshop compositing, it was the same thing, combining elements and seeing this thing kind of emerge. And in video editing in particular, it's the same thing. You're taking shots from scenes or bits of interviews and trimming them down. You're basically coalescing a variety of stuff into an end product. And all of those basically tell the story. A good song typically tells a story. I mean, I think, again, it comes back to people being wired for stories. Everybody loves to hear a good story. So when I was playing music, and I played music for a long time, I've early on, like a lot of kids, got into playing guitar just because it seemed like a cool, hip thing to do. But, after you did it for a while, it's like you need something more challenging, more engaging, more rewarding. And when I got turned on to singer-songwriters, all of a sudden that was way more important to me than like, hanging out for my next guitar solo. As self-gratiating as that might be, it's nowhere near as satisfying as being involved with a songwriter. A good songwriting, it doesn't need a guitar solo. Same with a well-edited piece of video or film. It doesn't need a lot of flash, but it needs good substance. It needs a good story. So I think there's a lot of parallels between music and filmmaking, editing in particular. There's a certain pacing to editing that is very musical. Being able to combine my musical knowledge and skills when it comes to editing, it helps me in selecting music that would be a good soundtrack, but I also find that it also influences the way I edit the pacing of dialogue scenes. I try to look for rhythms. Different actors have different rhythms. Different songs have got different rhythms. And the rhythms in songs are extremely intentional. And because you can play with the rhythms of what happens in editing, you can make musical statements out of it. And so, yeah, I think that my musical background definitely is a huge contributor and an asset to editing.
Starting early in your music career, you started thinking less about your solos and more about being involved in a complete song-making story. I think that parallels a little bit with my own career. I did a lot of one-man band stuff when I was starting out, and then just the pleasure, and it's usually as a sound mixer, but being involved in a big production where there's 10, 20, even more crew, and you're all different parts of a machine and each coming together to tell a grander story than one, two, or three people could ever do.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And coincidentally, the film crew actually parallels the band combo ensemble in many ways. For instance, I perceive the director as the lead singer of the band. The camera operator DP is the lead guitar player with all their obsession about their guitar pedals and multiple guitars and toys and gizmos. DPs are guilty of the same thing. I think of the sound guy as the bass player of the band, super, super critical and yet often like the unsung hero. And then you've got all the other cast of characters. And I do think that there is a certain camaraderie that you build in being in a band. And I mean, there's a lot of people that are in bands. It's like their equivalent of like, weekend game of hoop. They want people to hang out with and they want to do something that gives them some social interaction. And I'm not the most gregarious person, but I do find that playing music in bands and being on set with film crew, it's really cool because we're all doing something different, but we all know it contributes towards a cumulative thing. And just like I always felt that every musician in the bands that I've worked in was really important because without one of those people, you can only go so far. You can't get certain things done. If your drummer can't play a shuffle, you don't play blues. It's that simple. So you pick and choose the musicians that are appropriate for the gig or the music you want to perform, and you pick and choose the film crew that are tuned into the genre that you want to capture. And, obviously the actors are a key part of casting for the appropriate roles. But just strictly talking about band members and crew members, I found the parallel between the two to be really, really close.
In the Seattle area, we're dealing with micro budget or ultra low budget projects, and everybody like really kicks ass and does their part. But there's something to be said with going to an open mic with a bar stool and going up there with your guitar, and you got to rely on their lights and their sound system, but you control everything. And so as a filmmaker, once in a while you go out there with your camera and your sound kit, a few lights, and you just do something, and that's a cool thing too.
Well, music doesn't have to be a big production. I mean, yeah, we've all been to like arena events where they've got the big ass jumbotron and the monster PA system and the pyrotechnics and the lights, and that visual thing is really, really great, and sonically as well. But music can be just strumming a ukulele by the campfire. It's still music. I mean, it's like we get way too caught up in the glamour of it, and we lose sight of like the essence of it. It's like a song is a song is a song, just like someone can go shoot a movie on their iPhone. I mean, yeah, I'd love to have like an exotic camera and vintage lenses and a crew of 20 to do my next Stephen King film. But the reality is, you can do, whether you call it art or not doesn't really matter. You can do what you want to do with a minimal amount of gear. What makes it good isn't the gear; it's the craft, and it's whether there's like a story or a message or whatever you intended to achieve, whether you achieve it or not. Same with like music. You could have like a bunch of top-notch musicians, or you can just have some like-minded people that really believe and enjoy the camaraderie of what you're doing at the moment, and hopefully you're all relatively in tune and singing on pitch and staying in the same key and same tempo. But it doesn't even have to be perfect to be really, really good. And I think everybody really knows this. It's just that sometimes we just get a little bit too caught up in the idea of perfection, which is the enemy of good.
I don't want to lose my no profanity rating on YouTube for the video,
Go for it.
but I'm going fucking crazy being sequestered to my home. I want our viewers, I don't know for sure if I'm going to leave my voice in, but if I do, we've got 11 feet between us. So we are doing best practices with social distancing. But I've been going nuts being primarily at home, loving my work in the film industry and not able to do it. I'm getting by financially, maybe do the unemployment thing, but I'm not really worried about that for the next month, 2 month, 3 month out. But just feels really good to be talking to a fellow filmmaker in a professional setting. I've been sleeping really well lately. This morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. and I'm like 20,000 ideas in my head about the shoot and everything else. And I want to thank you so much for coming out and doing this with me.
Yeah, that's cool. And I hear you. It is frustrating to be kind of removed from what we love to do. And I think regardless of what job people have, if they have a job that they identify with, and all of a sudden you're forced to stop doing it, there's a little bit of an identity crisis. But that's good. The more it bugs you is a good indication of the more of how much it means to you. And yeah, I mean, there are people that are doing some pretty creative solo things right now. I'm kind of using this downtime to learn frame-by-frame hand-drawn animation, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time. But for a lot of people that all of a sudden have stopped doing what they were doing, it can be a really awkward time. I mean, like the Hollywood industry is like pretty much shut down right now. And we're going to see the result of that in probably, 8 to 9 months when all of a sudden we're watching a lot of reruns. And like for yourself, I feel for anybody in the Seattle area or any area for that matter that is dependent on the film industry or whatever industry they're in that now has to kind of be put on hold. I think, though, this is kind of a unique time for everybody. And I think a lot of, good revelations will come out of this. I mean, one, you appreciate what you miss, absence grows the heart, makes the heart grow fonder. You appreciate what you can't do when you can't do it. And I think it forces you to do a little bit of that self-reflection. And, it doesn't make anything easier, but it helps you kind of like push away the stuff that's not that important and really focus on the stuff that is. And I think once we get ramped back up into some semblance of the way we used to live and work, I think people are going to be really passionate about everything they do and really appreciative. And I really look forward to, like, being back on film sets with crew. And like, I had just started a documentary with a musician friend, and we had just got the ball rolling, and he was really excited about it. And we had like 3 or 4 days of good shoots in, and we just had to stop. We couldn't do any more. And it's like, it's heartbreaking because we were like having a ball doing it. And we'll resume, but you know how it is. You lose momentum and you lose time, and you always worry about something happening. I had also started a short film with Kit Wilson, and we had been doing scouting. We had already gotten 2 full days of shoots in, and it was a good cast and crew, and that came to a screeching halt. And what can you do but just sort of ride out the storm? And I know there's a lot of people that are like really hurting in a big way financially, and I hope that people come out of this the other end. But again, I think that there's a lot of good that's going to come from this, and I think people are going to learn to better appreciate and make better use of their downtime. And then when we do get back into the swing of things, I think people are going to really be appreciative of it.